How long does it take to go from 30% to 12% body fat? Well, I'm gonna use my client Jovan as a real life example. So his starting weight was 88 kgs or 194 pounds, and his body fat percentage was roughly 30% based on these body fat percentage graphs here. And you can follow along at home using these graphs here, as it will give you a rough guide, and then you can figure out a rough timeline of how long this is gonna take you to go from 30% down to about 12% body fat. So to figure this out, we simply take Jovan's weight minus his body fat percentage. This would be 88 kgs minus 30% equals 61.6 kilograms. Now that's Jovan's weight at 0% body fat, aka his fat-free mass. So from here, we simply just add about 12% body fat, and that would equal about 69 kilograms. So it's safe to say that Jovan needs to lose about 18 kilograms, give or take, to get down to around 12 to 15% body fat. Now, I personally like to use the rough guide of dropping 0.5 to 1% of your body weight every single week when you're in a fat loss phase. So based off this theory and these guides, that would take Jovan about 20 to 40 weeks of dieting to lose that 18 kilograms and get from where he was down to where he is now, which is about 12% body fat. Now, doing that math and the theory is great, and it gives us a rough guideline and it gives us some goals to aim for, which is absolutely perfect. But as we know, the theory and the math doesn't always perfectly equate to what happens in the real world. So here's the truth of what actually happened. It took Jovan about 1 year to get from here to here. His weight actually ended up at about 73 kgs on this right photo here, so a few kgs more than we guessed. There's a few reasons why this might have happened. My guess is he actually built a little bit of muscle over this year of dieting whilst losing a shitload of body fat as well. Now, I say this, of course, based on the pics, but to be honest, more so based on his diet and training, which we're about to cover in a minute. But before that, you're probably wondering, why did it take longer than the original 20 to 40 weeks that we had planned? Because doing the theory and the maths is great, but it doesn't leave any room for any life shit. For example, injuries, sickness, holidays, birthdays, weddings, social events, low motivation weeks, and the list goes on. And taking a few of those into account is the reason why it took Jovan longer than 20 to 40 weeks to lose that 18 kgs and to get down to 12% body fat. But here's the good news. As you can see by these progress pics here, he actually started seeing physical changes as soon as 20 days in. Then a few months later, even more progress, and then more, and so on. As you can see, his body started changing month by month, and we actually took a diet break at this point here. And this was simply to give Jovan a bit of a mental break from dieting, tracking, and being so accurate with all of his eating. Now, I actually texted Jovan this morning and I asked him what were the biggest habits and lifestyle changes that you had to make in order to be able to stick with this. And this is exactly what he said. For me, a couple of things needed to change. Number one, my relationship with food. I used to not care as much what I put into my body, and I'd eat whatever I wanted, when I wanted. And though I've always been physically active, I needed to make a change. So to me, that's pretty much saying that he understood that you cannot out-train a bad diet, because as you're about to hear, Jovan is very, very active, but he realized that it doesn't matter how much sport you play, how much training you do, you can't escape eating a shitty diet with high calories. He said, it's been well over a year now, and I wouldn't say I'm missing out when it comes to food. We still eat good. My active lifestyle consists of the 9 to 5 plus rugby plus gym plus performing, and it doesn't stop. And he said, my motto is eat good, feel good, perform good, which I thought was pretty cool as well. And then the second biggest habit change he said he made was just being consistent. So when it came to weekly check-ins, it was time for honest reflection. And obviously, if you're not working with the coach, I highly recommend doing these weekly check-ins with yourself. That's how I personally coach myself. Take progress photos, look at your weekly average scale weight, do an audit over the last week of how did your diet go? How did your training go? How many times did you eat off plan? Did you go over calories? Almost write it down and check in with yourself every single week. This was an honest reflection for him, setting realistic goals for the week ahead so that I was able to celebrate those wins the following week. And what worked for me was breaking it down and focusing on one day at a time, which I think is such a good message and reminder, because if you just nail the daily things, that's actually what gets you to that 12% body fat. It's nothing to do with a magical pill, supplements, the perfect plan. Of course, that stuff can help. Well, no magic pill, but it will help, but it's what you do on a daily basis. And if you just focus on today and then wake up and then you focus on tomorrow and then the next day and the next day and so on. Pretty wise words from the man there, and I thought that'd be cool rather than always coming from, you know, the coach or the PT or the fitness influencer, because, you know, people look at coaches and think, well, you're meant to be in shape, and honestly, I agree with you guys. So I think it was cool to hear from the client's perspective as well. But anyways, the actual setup we used to lose the body fat and build muscle at the same time was the following. And by the way, it was very simple. The first thing was, of course, training. Jovan was training a minimum of 4 times per week with weights, and he also played rugby as well, which was his cardio source. And then he simply just followed a program and he tracked majority of his lifts and reps, and then therefore he could try and beat them the next week and the next month and make sure he was progressing in the gym and not just going through the motions. And again, that's why I was saying previously, this this is why I do truly believe that he built some good muscle in that time frame as well. Number 2 was of course his nutrition. We simply started Jovan in a calorie deficit of about 500 to 700 below his maintenance to get the weight coming off faster in the beginning, as this is where it's easier to lose fat faster because you have more stored energy, aka body fat. Plus, to be 100% honest, in the beginning motivation is generally a lot higher, so I like to use that to your advantage and really push it hard at the start. This also helps with motivation and compliance because once you see the weight instantly drop in week 1, you're a lot more inclined to stick to it because you know that it works. To figure out your maintenance calories is very simple. You can use my free macro calculator, I'll pop it in the description for you, or you can just Google TDEE calculator, pop in your info, make sure you select the right activity level for you. Don't overestimate it or it will overestimate your calories. And then from there, how much of a deficit you want to be in, which means how much lower you want to eat from that TDEE number, is up to you. But to be honest, I would recommend at least 500 calories below that number it gives you if you want to be in a good sized deficit and actually get to this weight loss goal. And if you generally do 500 calories lower, you probably will be losing weight in between that 0.5 to 1% of your body weight, which we just spoke about. The third thing we did is of course high protein. Before, when I said that Jovan more than likely gained muscle and lost fat at the same time, was because he was eating a high protein diet of around 1.7 to 2 grams per kilogram of his body weight. For him, we were closer to 2 grams because he likes protein. It kept him full and satiated, which I'm a big fan of as well. And he was tracking all of his lifts, well, most of them. So we knew over time he was getting stronger, he was getting more reps. So his performance in the gym was increasing, and if you combine that with a high protein diet and the progress pics, it's a pretty good way to know that you're building some solid muscle. And then the fourth and final thing we did was super simple. We just increased his daily movement. Now, to be honest, we didn't actually worry about this, track it, or even try and increase it until he'd lost a solid amount of weight. So I believe the first 8 to 10 kgs, we didn't even focus on that. We just focused on those first 3 things. So the training, the nutrition, and the high protein, we didn't worry about this. Once we hit a bit of a plateau, then obviously chatted with Jovan. I said, do you want to, we can either lower the food a little bit more, lower the calories, keep everything else the same, or we can keep the calories the same for now. We can increase your energy output, meaning daily movement. And he was more keen on that one, which I recommend as well. If you can, why not? It's better to eat more in my opinion. And for that, whenever he hit a plateau, we simply just increased the daily movement until it was pretty much maxed out. So for him, and what I recommend doing for yourself, whenever you hit this plateau down the line, is to increase your daily steps by at least 2,000. That way across the week, you've increased your whole daily steps by about 14,000 on average. And that's a good chunk of activity, which means it'll further push you into the deficit and it should break that plateau. But of course, if you feel like you're already quite maxed out, you're doing tons of steps, maybe you work a very physical job, you're training hard all the time, you play sports, then increasing that even further might not be an option. So in that case, you would just want to lower your calories by about 10%. And that's literally all we did. Those 4 things. Now you can see how long it can take and how long it probably will take based on a real life example. And honestly, props to Jovan. He's an amazing client and he puts in the effort, he puts in the work, and he obviously reaps the rewards for that. But as you can see, even with someone that puts in so much effort, it still takes a bit longer due to all those life shit things that we went through. So please factor in, I highly recommend figuring out roughly how long it's going to take you to get to your goal based off your current weight and body fat and all that stuff, and then factor in a little bit more time for life stuff happening. But don't try to avoid the life stuff because obviously that's just not going to be fun at all, but just factor it in. You should be sweet. Be good if I could talk today. Anyways, I hope that was helpful. If you like this type of video, you find that valuable, I highly recommend checking out this one next. I think you'll like that one too.